Hey to all the viewers. I hope you all are doing great. Welcome to this webinar on generative AI and data analytics. Um, so let's just give it a couple of minutes until everyone joins in, and then we can get started with the session today. So in the meantime, it would be great to know where all of you guys are watching this from. So whichever platform you're watching, or just drop in the chat wherever you're from, which city, which country, so that we get to know you better. All right, so I see people from Silicon Valley, New Jersey, Chicago, India. We have a large number of people coming in. There are people from Canada, USA, California. So we have a very diverse viewer set today. That is great to hear. California, Kentucky. Okay, that's pretty awesome. Glad to see that there are people joining in from different regions. I hope that the session today will be helpful for you. It will be a good learning opportunity for you. It will get those creative juices flowing, and you can make use of what we discussed today in your practical implementation. So, alrighty then, I think we are on the mark. So let's go ahead and get started with the webinar today. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen, and then we can get started with the webinar. Just give me a minute and I will share my screen. Alrighty, so I am going to go ahead and get started with the session today. So hey there, welcome everyone. For those who are just joining in, I hope you are doing good. The title for the session today that we're going to be covering is going to be data analytics and generative AI. We're going to be understanding how we can make use of these two components together, data analytics and generative AI, to enhance your smart decision-making process. So before we dive into the details of the session today, I would just like to go ahead and introduce myself. So my name is Alvar Wahab. I am a senior data scientist and instructor at Data Science Dojo, and I will be presenting in place of Andrew Matson today regarding your generative AI and analytics. So about me, I am a senior data scientist and a lead instructor at Data Science Dojo. I am involved in a number of training programs that we offer, including Data Science Bootcamp, Python for Data Science, and Introduction to Power BI. I am pretty much passionate about analytics, storytelling, and at the same time, sharing my knowledge as an educator with people regarding analytics, cloud-based AI, machine learning. These are also the projects that I'm currently working on and involved in at my company. So that should give you a brief idea about who I am. Let's go ahead and get started with what we're going to be covering today. So in this session today, we are going to start off with the basics. We're going to first understand what is generative AI and how it is different from something that you might already know of, which is discriminative AI. We'll then be diving into some real-world use cases on how a company might have implemented generative AI to enhance their business and decision-making process or customer experience. Then we're going to look at what a typical analytics pipeline looks like in general. And we're going to do some small activities in which we will try to make use of generative AI to enhance those typical analytics processes. So at the end of the session, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be utilizing generative AI and analytics to make that process faster, better, more convenient, and something that is good for the company or the personal user. So starting off with trying to decode what is generative AI. You might have heard this term being thrown around a lot, right? Generative AI. There has been a boom in the hype surrounding it. So it's basically just a category of AI algorithms that generate new content based on the data that they have been previously trained on. So as you might have noticed, the amount of quantity that the companies have regarding data keeps increasing day by day, right? And as the quantity gets much and much larger, there is, in fact, around only 80% of data being 20% of the data being structured, while the remaining 80% remains unstructured. When we're talking about structured data, it's something that's arranged properly in the form of rows and columns, right? But then you have videos and images and text and all of that. All of this remains unstructured. And if a company were to ignore that, they would be wasting some potential. They could utilize this to get better insights and improve their enhance their business decision-making process. So this is where generative AI comes into place, where it takes this large quantity of data and it uses that to carry out generative AI. Examples of this are text generation, image generation, audio generation, and video generation. And we'll move on to looking at how each of these have their individual benefits and use cases. Now, in comparison to discriminative AI, which is something you might have already heard of, if you had heard of the term called machine learning, right? The task of machine learning is to basically try to build a model that can be utilized for prediction purposes. So, for example, you're a credit card company, right? And you have built a model that detects if a transaction is fraud or not. So how was that built? It uses historical data to learn all those patterns, that if a user is logging in at this point, or if they're trying to carry out this particular transaction over and over again, their behavior is being recorded. If something is suspicious, it detects that out and it classifies the transaction as a fraud transaction. So how does this work? Well, the model is first trained on the historical data that it already has present, and it tries to find some sort of relationship between all those different features and the label that's connected to it, which you're trying to predict. So, for example, if somebody if they made a mistake 3 times of entering the password incorrectly before actually successfully logging in, that can be counted as a suspicious activity. And if somebody doing that historically was somebody who had committed fraud, in the future, if that pattern repeats again, you can classify that as a fraud transaction. So this is what we have already been accustomed to, right? This is something that we have already been working with. Now, in comparison, there's something called generative AI. And generative AI, what it tries to do is, it takes that historical data and it tries to generate new data from it. The new data that's generated, it tries to replicate the patterns and the distribution of the data that it was previously trained on. So, for example, if you had a bunch of images, right, you can use those images to create new images that the world has never seen before. So if, for example, we were to look at this picture of a cat, if we were to give it to a discriminative algorithm, what it would do is, it would try to harvest some features from this image. So this cat, it has 2 ears, it has 2 eyes, it has whiskers. Based on that, we can build up a model that will either try to classify it as a dog or a cat. So a dog will have particular features and a cat will have particular features. Maybe a cat might have pointy ears, right? Or in comparison, a dog has ears that droop down. So based on this information, what we're going to do is, we are going to classify the model as a dog or a cat. Then, in comparison, generative algorithm, what they try to do is, they take images from beforehand. So for example, if we have a bunch of images of cats, we train the model on that. And then what's going to happen is that we're going to generate a similar cat image using the historically trained model. So you're creating a new image of a cat from the data it previously had before. So this is how discriminative and generative model differ from each other. So the categories of generative models, the one that we're going to be discussing, include generative language models. And how they work is that they learn about patterns in language through training data. And then whenever they're given some text, they try to predict what comes next. So example of these models are ChatGPT and Bard. And I'm pretty sure that everyone has become accustomed to these 2 models, right? So ChatGPT is by OpenAI and Bard is by Google. And how they exactly work is that they had taken large amount of data and they had understood that data by converting it into embeddings. Basically, embeddings is the goal of assigning some sort of vector to a word by understanding its semantic meaning. So this entire process is something that these models have already been done before. So these models have already been trained, right? They took large amount of data, they figured out some patterns and correlation and all of that by creating those embeddings. And now what happens is that whenever you give a prompt to these models, right? So you go to ChatGPT and you type in a prompt, and you go to Bard and you type in a prompt, it tries to give you a response that's related to it, based on the data it had previously done before. So this is how generative language models work. Well, in comparison, there are also generative image models. And how they do, and their task is to generate new images from previously trained images. So whenever you give a prompt or a somewhat related image, they try to generate new images to satisfy that prompt. So for example, if you were to go to a model such as DALL-E and you type in something like generate a marshmallow for me, right? So it's going to generate a new image from the previous pictures of marshmallow that it has already seen. Or if you give it an image, it will try to generate an image related to that, similar to that. Now, how do these generative image models work? Whenever you put in an image, it goes through this process where you add noise to the image, which means you're basically distorting the image. So you take an image, for example, you upload a picture, and that image gets distorted completely. Then, once it is basically incomprehensible, it tries to restore that image. And in this process of restoring that image, you end up with something that might be similar to the original image, but it will not exactly be the same. So using this entire process, models such as DALL-E, Midjourney, they generate these new and different images. So comparing overall how ML models and generative AI models work. With ML models, you take your data, the model learns that data, and it tries to find the relationship between all those features and the label. So it can carry out predictions. For example, if you have a house pricing stored from 2001 to 2010, and then you're trying to predict what the prices are going to be in the future using that historical data. So it might be that a large plot has a higher price. It might be that something that is in a more in a very good neighborhood, that might end up being more pricey, right? So it will try to compare the current features with the historically trained data features and try to make predictions on the basis of that. Well, in comparison with your generative AI, you're just putting in a lot of unstructured content inside. You're putting in either a lot of images, either a lot of text, and then you're training it on that. And once the model learns the patterns in that unstructured content, it can use that to generate some new images or new text documents and so on. Now, looking at the different domains where generative AI comes into place. If you're just simply focusing on text, you have it being utilized in marketing when it comes to content, in sales when it comes to email, support, chat, email, general writing, note taking, and so on. So even personally, when I'm trying to construct an email, right, I go ahead and make use of these tools to help me draft those emails up. Companies are using it to create some search engine optimized content for marketing purposes. It's actually reducing a workload on the entire workforce because most of the tasks can be sped up by utilizing these tools. Of course, there are going to be some drawbacks and limitations of it. They are not 100%. There is an issue of hallucination where they might not come up with the right information or something that's wrong. But if you have some user that is able to quickly use these tools to write up some text, carry out a manual human review, you can end up with something that is useful overall. Then at the same time, people who are involved in the technical domain, they are able to generate code using the help of generative AI. So if you want to write Python code, if you want to write SQL code, it's not necessary that you have to know the entire programming syntaxes beforehand. You can just give a prompt to ChatGPT or you can give a prompt to Bard, and they're going to write that entire code for you based on the prompt that you had given. You can actually even design entire websites with the help of generative AI. Then when it comes to images, you can generate images for maybe related to, if you're an artist, right? It could be beneficial for you. You can generate art-related images, or you can generate things for your marketing purposes that your company can post on the platform. So for social media marketing, advertisement, design, all of that, this is where also generative AI can come into place. You also the use cases keep on increasing day by day, right? You have multiple tools being launched every day that can help you enhance your process. For example, there are products that you can add to your meeting. So it's a product, an AI tool that you can incorporate into your meeting. And what it does is it transcribes the entire meeting and generates a summary for you. So instead of having to watch the entire recording of the meeting, you can just go to the summary to get a quick recap of what was covered. So different domains are making use of generative AI for different purposes. And here's an example of a company that is making use of this with respect to generative AI. So the problem statement that they had was that drive-through takes time, right? People come in, they list down their orders. At points, there might be some miscommunication. They'll have to ask you to repeat the entire thing. So this presence of challenges, what it did was it prompted the need for some sort of innovation. So there's a fast food company that actually made use of generative AI to enhance the entire process. So the original process, it lacked efficiency. So it might cause a really long time to understand what product does the customer want and to actually get it to them. So what they did was they made use of an AI-driven platform to generate a drive-through chatbot. And the entire purpose of that was to streamline the order processing. So if a customer, whatever the chatbot, the customer could just, so there are two mediums, right? Either they can type or either they can use a text-to-speech medium, sorry, a speech-to-text medium that would take the customer speech and convert it into text. And then based on that, you can pass it on to your LLM models. They're going to return a response. So large language models such as Bard or ChatGPT, they can return a response. And that response is either forwarded to the relevant department or returned to the customer if there was some error with it. So these models, they're able to deal with common customer queries. And at the end, there was a significant reduction in the service times that was initially in comparison to the site that was operating manually. There was also a high success rate in accuracy. So I believe it was around 20-ish seconds in reduction of the time taken to take the order from the person. And in this fast-paced environment, that's actually pretty good, right? But the better thing was that it had around 99%, if I'm not mistaken, around 99% accuracy when processing the orders. So initially, they have experienced a good success rate with this product. They're trying to, they plan on expanding this platform more, incorporating more items into it, or further enhancing this and expanding it to different franchises in the upcoming year of 2024. So that's just one use case, right? And there are many industries. It's in healthcare, it's in finance, generative AI is being used everywhere. So it's important to understand how we can use that for our particular specific use case. And we'll be looking at some examples of how we can do that for your typical analytics pipeline. So the goal of generative AI in analytics, it increases your productivity because it lets you automate some tasks. For example, when a company is creating content for their website, right? They don't have to write everything from scratch. They can automate that task. Similarly, somebody who does not have prior programming experience, right? They'd be reluctant to dive into this field because they'll have to learn everything from scratch. And they might have to reach out to somebody to actually help them carry out that particular task. But however, with generative AI, you can do the coding it can do the coding for you. You just have to give it some algorithms. You have to just give it some pseudocode, right? You have to describe the problem statement, and it will try to generate a code for you. And then debugging is where you'll have to implement your own skill set, try to figure out what problem that you're encountering and resolve it out. So that's pretty much it on the generative AI side. Now let's just briefly go over what data analytics is. So the goal of data analytics is to take your raw data and extract some meaningful insights and patterns from it. And the goal of data analytics is that it allows a business to make some informed decision making. So based on their previous data. They can try to understand what happened. They can try to figure out what went wrong and how to avoid it in the future. Or they might try to carry out predictive analytics, which is predicting future outcomes. And in that case, what they can do is they can, for example, if you're browsing through, let's say, a social media platform, and you're shown an advertisement that's targeted towards you. How does that work? Well, your previous data has been collected on what type of advertisements you like to interact with, what products you like to buy. And on that basis, you're being given a recommendation. So this is a predictive analytics. There's a likelihood that you will actually go ahead and buy this product. So that's why you're targeted for that particular product. So data analytics is in 4 different domains, right? There's descriptive analytics, which is to understand the data that has the historical data that has been previously collected. Then diagnostic analytics is the goal of trying to understand why did something happen in the past. So reasoning, that's where you try to diagnose the situation. Predictive analytics is where you try to predict the future based on historical data. And prescriptive analytics is similar to predictive analytics, except it's more focused towards what steps do you have to take to achieve that. So this is what your typical analytics pipelines looks like. You have the data acquisition step, then you have the data preprocessing, and then you have the exploratory data analysis. So in data acquisition, you try to acquire the data from different mediums, right? So you could carry out surveys, web scraping, IoT, devices. It's endless, right? Data is everywhere. And once you have acquired the data, you clean and transform it. You try to generate new features from it. And then you move on to the part of actually trying to understand that data, carrying out your statistical analysis, visual analysis. So in each of these domains, generative AI can play some sort of role. For example, with data acquisition, it's very common that people don't have enough data to actually build out a machine learning model. Machine learning models can end up requiring a good amount of data, right? And if you don't have enough data, it can lead to problems such as overfitting, which basically means that your model memorizes the data instead of finding patterns inside of it. So to deal with this problem, to deal with the absence of good quantity of data, your generative AI can be used to generate synthetic data, or take the existing data and augment it to generate new data. So in case there's an absence, you don't have to worry about it. Generative AI can be utilized to generate new data. Moving on to the step of data preprocessing, where we're talking about transformation and cleaning. Over here, again, generative AI can play a good role. It can help you with cleaning, preprocessing, creating SQL queries and all of that. And we'll be looking at some example later. And then finally, generative AI can also be used to actually generate your visualizations. So in our session today, we will be using, I will be showing a demonstration of how we can carry out generation of synthetic data in Python using OpenAI. Then we will be moving on to how we can create automated measures in using Microsoft Copilot and Power BI. And then finally, I'll show you how we can generate visualization in Power BI. And all of these 3 steps will be with the assistance of generative AI. So let's go ahead and dive into the activity on each of these individual steps. So starting on, we will be carrying out the activity of generating synthetic data in Python. So let me just scroll a bit up. And this is a sample example. And of course, you can make use of this practical implementation in your own use cases. So just an overview of what OpenAI is. OpenAI is basically the company that's behind models such as ChatGPT. ChatGPT has a model, is backed up by a model called GPT-3 or GPT-4. And using that, so either you can carry out this task directly on platforms such as ChatGPT or Bard, or either you can make use of their APIs. APIs allow you to carry out programming. However, APIs have a cost associated with it. For example, GPT-3 is a free service, right? Your ChatGPT, the simple ChatGPT is a free service. ChatGPT Plus has a monthly subscription, but GPT-3 is free. So in case you don't want to splurge, you can make use of ChatGPT simply. But for automation and programming purposes, this is where OpenAI comes into place, right? So to start off, just give me a minute. Let me just resume it. All right, okay. So what we're going to do is in this activity, we're going to start off with a small data set. And using that data set, what we'll try to do is we'll try to create new rows that is similar to the original data set. At the end, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be expanding the total quantity of our data set with the help of a large language model. So the model that we're going to be using over here is going to be your GPT model, basically your ChatGPT OpenAI. And to start off with the example, first in Python, of course, we're going to be importing some of the libraries. The libraries that we're going to be using are the OpenAI library. And one more thing that I'm mentioning over here is the NLTK library, which we're going to be using to calculate the sentiment of a review. So the data set that we have over here is basically reviews left by people at particular restaurants. So it has the information about the people, for example, what their full name is, wherever they live, what their age is, and what review did they left, right? And each review will have a sentiment. People either had a good experience with that restaurant, or either they did not have a good experience with the restaurant. So it's a positive review or a negative review. Your sentiment score is on a scale of 0 to 1, with 0 being a very negative score and 1 being a very positive score. So, -1 to 1, with -1 being a very negative score and 1 being a very positive score in our particular use case. So if somebody has a good experience, 0.8, if they're leaving a positive review, 0.7, 0.8. And then if they are not having a good experience, -1, something like that. So to start off, and also just to highlight the questions that we are getting in the chat, we will be discussing them at the end of the session. So no need to worry. We will address each and every question that everyone is posting in the chat. So anytime that you have any questions, feel free to post that. We will be going over that one by one at the end of our session. So here we have this data. We're basically creating this dictionary, which has a person's full name, their address, their age, and the reviews. And I'm basically going and creating a table out of it, a pandas data frame. And if you see over here, we have 5 people, right? For example, we have Alice. She lives over here. This is her age, and this is the review that she left. That the food at this restaurant was absolutely amazing, and so on. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take this data that is already present. We're going to pass it to the GPT model. Again, GPT model is something that has been previously trained, right? It already has a large amount of information. So you can use that for this purpose of generating your synthetic data points. So what I'm going to do is just think about this, right? Think that you have ChatGPT open and you are pasting this over here. That you are an AI assistant and your purpose is to generate 5 data points upon user request. Return the table and do not return any additional text. And you have to generate these 5 data points that have similar distribution, pattern, and sentiment to this existing data. And I'm passing it the entire table over here. So what I'm doing is I'm giving it this table and I'm asking it to generate something similar to that. So I'm pasting this all over there and I'm asking it to generate new data using that. And once I do that, I get an output that I stored in this variable, the response variable. So let me just print it out and show you what it looks like over there. So this has a lot of parameters returned alongside it, right? But this is the main thing over here. This is the content that is being returned. This is basically the response that the model is giving. So it has generated some data for me and it has returned it back to me. So moving on, what I'm doing is I'm simply just calculating the sentiment score of the existing data set. So this is the original data set that I had. And I'm trying to see what is the sentiment using this analytical library. So row by row, I'm calculating the sentiment of each review. And the review over here is positive because it's a 0.8 score, which is closer to 1. This is negative, this is negative, this is positive, this is negative. Right, so there's a spread. A total of 2 reviews are positive and a total of 3 reviews are negative. So ideally, that the data set that the model generated, the ChatGPT basically generated, it should also have your 3 negative reviews and 2 positive reviews. So the output that the model returned, the GPT model returned basically, was in a dictionary format. The next thing that I'm doing is I'm simply just taking that output and I'm pulling out the text from it. And this is the generated text that we had previously seen. Now it has to be clean, it has to be pre-processed, keeping in mind that cleaning and pre-processing is a very critical stage of your analytics pipeline. And in fact, around 70% of the time by data scientists and engineers and analytics is spent in trying to clean and pre-process this data. Because we have large quantities of data that needs to be fixed before it can actually be used. And there's this common phrase in data science that garbage in, garbage out. So if you're giving the model garbage, it's going to return garbage. So to avoid problems like that, you have to make sure that the data that you have has been cleaned, fixed, and is good to use. So there is some pre-processing that is going on over here, where we are. So you have these separators that we're removing. We're splitting this data up and trying to convert it into a neat table for optimal outcome. So now I'm going to run this, and at the end, I will end up with this table. So this is the response that I got from OpenAI. And this is the synthetic data that they have generated from me by firstly understanding the existing data that I have, and you're generating something similar to it. And if you see the age, the mean value for the age is similar to the mean value for the original data. So the synthetic data has similar distribution to the original data. Similarly, if you look at the sentiment scores, right? So over here, we have 2 positive reviews and 3 negative reviews. And in comparison, we had something similar in original data, 2 positive, 3 negative. So we have basically what we have done is we have used existing data to generate something new. And since these pre-trained models, the GPT models, these models have semantic information, right? So it's easy for them to generate some reviews that are similar semantically. So this is the first step, right? So this is where one use case, a simple use case, where we were using a pre-trained model to generate synthetic data. You can actually use different techniques to actually generate for example, in the case of GANs, right? So you can create your own GAN models, and you can use that for generating new data from your existing data. So the next step that we were going to talk about after your data collection was your data preprocessing. This is the step where you carry out your transformation and cleaning. So a use case that I will be showing you is with the aid of Microsoft Copilot, which is a powerful tool that you can use for generating your visualizations and stuff inside of Power BI. So let's go ahead and let me just show you a demonstration. So let me just go to our Power BI. Just give me a minute. So let me just first explain what Power BI is. So Power BI is basically a business intelligence tool. And the purpose of that is to generate some insightful interactive visualizations. So this is what the interface of Power BI looks like. You have a report view where you can generate some clever visualizations, right? So if I wanted to generate something like a pie chart or anything, I can just drag and drop all these items, and it's a very simple tool to generating your insightful visualization. So let me just give you an example. Let's say I wanted to see total orders of a company by category of the product. So I can go ahead and do that. So it's a drag and drop tool, and it is a free tool if you're using the desktop version for generating your visualizations. Now, one thing that can become a bit tricky in Power BI is creating your measures and calculated columns. So there is this concept of DAX, and with DAX, what you have to do is it's an analytical expression language, and the purpose of that is that if you want to summarize some values, if you want to get if you want to create new values from existing values, new columns from existing columns, that's where you put DAX into place. So it's somewhat of programming, and sometimes it might get hard to keep track of all the different functions available inside of DAX. So Microsoft recently launched a method to incorporate Microsoft Copilot inside of Power BI. And I'll just show you a quick example of how that can be done. So starting off, firstly, initially, like if you wanted to create a measure, right, you would have to click on this new measure. And you would have to manually write down the formula. So for example, if I wanted to see, let's say total sales, right? So sum of some particular column, let's search for revenue. So I had to write down this formula to actually calculate this particular value. And this is just a simple example, right? These formulas can keep on getting more and more complicated. If I wanted to see this over here, what I'm doing is I'm taking this revenue column and I'm taking a sum of this entire column. If I wanted something more, the DAX query could actually end up getting very complicated. So instead, there is this ability of you to incorporate Copilot inside of Power BI. And as an example, before that, actually, you have to make sure that you have your feature enabled, since this is something that has been launched in preview. So in the case of Microsoft, before launching a product generally, they launch it in preview just to understand if it has any issues or not. So if any issues are, they can recall it or they can fix out. So you have to make sure that this preview feature is enabled. So going into options, preview features, making sure over here that your sorry, it's not in preview. I think it's in. Let me just check. A minute. I am. Oh, here it is. Yeah, sorry about that. This is under preview features. There is something by the name of quick measure suggestions, and this is where you can use Microsoft Copilot to enhance your analytics capabilities. So make sure that is enabled, and then let me just give you an example of how this actually works. So all I have to do is I have to click on quick measure, go to suggestions with Copilot. And what I will do is I will type in natural language that will describe what I wanted to do, what kind of measure that I wanted to create. And it will create that on my behalf. So for example, if I wanted to calculate total revenue, so I can just type in total revenue. Let's actually make it more different. Total revenue by product category. This is just stuff that I'm typing in your natural language, basically English. And when I click on generate, it is going to give me suggested measures that are related to this particular formula. So you see, average total revenue for all categories, names per product name. And it returns me the corresponding value for it. So it wrote this entire formula for me. If you remember this formula that I had to type manually, it's going to write the entire formula by itself. And if this was something that was correct for me, I can just simply click on add, and I can add this, and then I can use this for my visuals. So this is where generative AI comes into place, right? So with your coding and all of that, there are some cool extensions that keep on being launched. Copilot also has, even you can even use this in Excel to enhance your report visualization process. So this is just one case of how generative AI is making the entire process of analytics much more easier for people. And one more thing that I want to cover briefly is that we can even add something called your Q&A. And this tool basically works by what you have to do is you just have to type in your natural language, and it will generate a visualization relevant to it. So for example, if I want to see total revenue by order category, all I did was typed in and it generated a relevant visualization for that. I can do total revenue by product name, and at the same time, it just generates those visualization for me. So rather than having to generate it all manually, all you have to do is just type in your natural language, and it's going to try to understand it and map it into a related visualization. So this is where generative AI is playing a crucial role in your analytics pipeline. It's basically speeding up this entire process for you and allowing you to get to the main part, right? So the goal of a person who's working on analysis is to make sure that they're able to harvest some insights, actionable insights from these visualizations. Just showing this visualization to people is not enough. Your goal is to actually generate some action items from it. So if there is a decrease in the sales, you have to propose methods on how we can increase the sales, because your goal is to uncover what is wrong and how you can fix that. So this process being sped up allows the people who are working on the analytics side to actually speed up their entire process. They can now focus more on trying to harvest these actionable items from these visualizations. So as we discussed, there are numerous use cases of generative AI, right? In today's session, we looked at how in analytics, in the process of analytics, we can use these generative AI tools for your data generation, creating those measures with your data preprocessing, and then you can even generate some visualizations with the aid of this. So that would basically be an overall wrap on the session today. Before we move on to the questions, I would like to thank everyone for attending the sessions today. And now I would like to, if you have any other further questions, you can reach out to us at our email address. But in the meantime, I would like to open up the forum for a discussion. So let's go ahead and address the questions that have been shared with us. So let me just go ahead and go through each of the question. So let me see. Okay, so there is a question on what causes generative AI to hallucinate? Do these models experience issues such as overfitting? All right. So to go over what overfitting is, right? In overfitting, what actually happens is that your model memorizes the data because it's such in little quantity. And then it tries to, whenever you make those predictions in the future, it's going to make some bad predictions because the data that has been memorized, it has, instead of learning the patterns, it memorized those values. So now, in the case of your model, what's going to happen is that it won't work out. The problem that we were talking about for hallucination that you have mentioned, it is because there is an absence, in case there's an absence of proper context, it can cause the model to hallucinate. It's a very critical aspect that you have to work with and you have to play around with, because the model has been trained on large amount of data, right? And it works on probability. It's not that it's going to give you the same answer every time. It might give you the same answer or different answer, because it's again probability based. So what you have to do is you have to play around with the context. You have to play around with what prompt that you're giving it, and that can avoid the problem of hallucination. So it's all about being more clear in your statements, because generative AI models, basically, they try to find the easy path. If you think about it, they'll try to give you the simplest answer possible. So in that case, if you want an answer that's more accustomed to your use cases, you have to get better with prompt engineering. You have to play around. You have to see what proper prompt engineering techniques are there. And what prompt engineering basically means is that you're trying to optimize your prompt. You're trying to make sure that the model actually listens to what you're trying to say to it. So if you go back to the example of our notebook, right? So let me just open that up. This is the prompt that I had given it, that you are an AI assistant. This is your purpose. This is what you have to do. Write a new review, generate a table, only a markup table. So I was very clear in my instructions. So in case you're very clear and very making sure that you are not giving a vague statement, this will end up reducing the probability of the model actually hallucinating. So that basically hopefully answers your question. Moving on. The drive-through AI solution was used to confirm customer requests before a human filled that order. Yes, that is correct. It is accurate. Thank you for asking that, Greg. So there are a couple of questions regarding if the notebook will be available. So let me check this with my team and see if we can make the notebook available to all the attendees. Hopefully, we would be able to share it with everyone who had attended the session, keeping in mind that this requires an OpenAI key, right? So it is going to be a paid service. So if you want to play around with this, you can go ahead and perhaps use ChatGPT. But if you want to use OpenAI, there is a per token cost associated with it. Okay, so then, okay, so there are some questions regarding how much synthetic data do you require to actually generate this data, right? So there is there is no set standard for each and every use cases. It's going to vary from use case to use case, depending on the type of data that you actually have. So this is something that you actually have to play around with and see if you're getting something that's good enough or not, right? So it's a experimental technique that you have to think work with. All right. So there is a question: how accurate are the measures generated by MS Copilot and Power BI? Can we trust the result? So whenever you're working with generative AI, you can never trust the result, to be honest, because it can end up making mistakes, right? There's a problem of hallucination. There's a problem of it not understanding what you're actually communicating to them. So you have to first manually review all of these things and make sure that they are actually meeting your criteria, which is why inside of Power BI, when you're working with these measures, right? So if I open it up again, just give me a minute. So creating a new measure. Sorry, I had to click on group measure. Just give me a minute and I will show that up. Just going to click on measure. I'm sure why it's not opening up. Just one more minute. Okay. So when you're working with quick measures, whatever you're typing over here, right? So total total revenue for 2017. If I type that out and I paste it over here, it's going to give me some suggestions. And how they work is that if at the top they explain what this formula over here is, right? So it's basically the formula for when the total revenue, what was the total revenue for when the year of the stock date is 2017. And then there's a preview value below it, which is blank. That means there were no sales for the stock date 2017. So basically what's happening over here is that this formula, this is the name of the formula. This is what it's trying to calculate. So if this is what your requirement is, right? You want the total revenue over year of the stock date is 2017. If that was your use case, this is fine. But what if I did not want for stock date? What if I want it for order date or something like that? So then this formula would not be correct. So I would have to go ahead and change this to total revenue for order date. And then it might return. So there is no formula for order in our case. So maybe like bulk order or something, or weekend order. So we can try that. So if it, for example, over here, this is giving me the total revenue where weekend is weekend, but so basically the bulk order where the year or date is. So this is basically all the information about what value it's trying to calculate and the output of that as well. And it's not only going to give me one suggestion, it's going to give me multiple suggestions. So maybe this might be for my case, maybe this might be for my case, maybe this might be for my case. So again, you'll have to manually see which one is actually meeting your criteria. And if the value matches, you can just simply click on add, and it's going to be added inside of your measures. Okay. So how could I assure that the generative AI information generates as a sentiment example is random? Okay. So there are actually frameworks out there. So there are very helpful frameworks that can enhance this process for you. When it comes to generative AI, there are frameworks such as guardrails, LangChain, and for LLMs particularly, these can help you ensure some restrictions, right? So if you want to make sure that the output is coming in the right format, if you want, for example, if you're requesting the model to give you a JSON file format, and if it's returning you something else, every time it gives you something different. It might, because it's a probabilistic model, right? It might make mistakes. So to ensure that the answer is meeting your criteria, you can make use of these frameworks. So again, guardrails, guidance AI, LLMs, your LangChain. And these can make sure that your particular use cases meet certain criteria. So you can implement restrictions on these answers and make sure that your criteria is being met. So I hope that answers your question. Let me go ahead and carry it on. Okay, so there is a question that can we use OpenAI to return a sentiment label instead of using NLTK sentiment intensity, right? So that is possible as well. Since as we discussed, OpenAI has been trained on a large amount of data, it can understand when is the feedback positive and when is the feedback negative. So instead of the activity that we were doing, we were numerically calculating the sentiment. You can use OpenAI for that purpose. However, keeping in mind that OpenAI might not calculate these numbers accurately. It can give you that this is a positive feedback and this is a negative feedback very well. That's a simple task, right? It can do that. However, if you're trying to measure the exact value of the sentiment score, it's going to return you it might return you something different every time. So this is where you have to be careful for carrying this out. There is something called embeddings as well that you can create. So the OpenAI has text embeddings available. So if you're using chat as your GPT models, this might not work out. For embeddings, you have the option of creating embeddings for those, basically vectors for those particular words, and use that to calculate the sentiment score. That is an added process. That's also a possibility. So yeah, it has much more opportunities available for you to explore. So that's a very great point. Okay, I think that is all of the questions. Let me just verify. Okay, so there is a question in the chat about summarizing what generative AI can do and ML cannot. So as we discussed, discriminative models is basically machine learning, right? So the purpose of that is to use the existing data to make predictions. While in generative AI, you're using the data to actually generate new data. So that's the difference between these two. Machine learning cannot be used for generating new data. It's used for classification problems. It is used for regression problems in all that cases. So I hope that answers your question. Right, let me just verify if that is a wrap on all the questions.